And when you read, I'm going to be on camera.
Yeah, okay. You're already on camera. What do you mean?
All right, go ahead. I just don't know where to look. Now I'm getting on there.
Welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable. I'm your host, Laurin Conlon. Each week, we share the evidence-based practices and communication-driven strategies we use with our clients and give you the tools that you need to be successful for life. So this week, I am joined by Dr. Bill Campbell, my mentor, grad school advisor, all-around fabulous person, and he also runs the Physique Enhancement Laboratory at USF. So today, we're going to finally talk in depth about our research study that took many years to come out, and this has been something that I've talked about since I graduated in 2016. But since then, 5 years, a lot can happen, and you can learn a lot and you can apply a lot. So I learned a lot of things initially, which we'll get into, but then I did change, I guess not really what I learned, but my perspective on what I learned and how I actually applied that to clients, later down the line. And that's really influenced, everything that I've done since then with coaching. So welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I know, this felt like forever that I was never going to see Conlon at all. Never going to see it, never happened. But I'm thrilled that we got it in JISSN, which is a really good journal for our field, and able to have it open access, which is really important to me, because one of the biggest hindrances with research is not only the language, of course. Most people, if they don't, they're not aware of how it's written, or our paper was very easy to follow, but there's some papers that are just super scientific, super technical. But also, you click on it and you read the abstract, you're like, this is going to be a great paper, and then it's like $40 and you're like, damn, this sucks. And if you're at a university, you're able to log in with your credentials and you can download it for free. But if you're not actively in school, it can really be a hindrance for people. So I wanted this to be open access, so anybody can download this and read it. I will put it in the show notes, so you guys can download that if you want. But yeah, I'm excited to talk all about this.
Yes, and to be fair, we did submit it to a journal about a year prior. They didn't reject it, but they just had too many revisions that I don't think either of us felt comfortable making. So we said thanks, but no thanks. So that also delayed the ultimate publication.
Yeah, and it's not like I was in a race to do it. I wasn't trying to get a PhD, so it wasn't of utmost urgency to get it done, I guess you could say. And I just wanted it to be in a good journal, mostly, for you in the lab, because that matters to me. But yeah, so let's get into it. This, in 2014, I came into grad school, all ripped roaring, ready to go. And the lab was very different then. Do we want to talk about that a little bit? Yeah,
and I think just to set the table for that, you were coming there under the pretense of a vision for what the lab would become, what it is today. That wasn't there. That was an idea when you came.
Yes.
So there's much. That. Now looking back, it's like, wow, now we...
Well, and you had that, I always tell people, you had this crystal clear vision, and I always was like, this guy's nuts. I don't know what, before I got there, I'm there's 3 girls in my gym. There's no way we're going to have just female research, lifting weights, all this stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm down, but I don't see it happening. And now it's very much a reality. And the lab has grown into this really, really awesome thing that is very self-sufficient. Of course, it's still run by you. And I don't want to say that in a way that takes away from what you're doing, but the lab operates on its own. It's
a student-directed lab, which is my dream, because it allows me to mentor and allow students to make mistakes at times, but they get to take ownership in the ideas, the execution, and it makes me a better delegator. So everything about it is so different. Yes, yeah. Than when you were there. Yeah, when I was there, but it was great. For me, it was awesome. I cherish all of those moments so much. And it was basically me, Danielle, and you.
And Taylor helped a little bit.
Yes,
Taylor Jordan,
our intern at the time.
She was an intern, so she did come and help. And oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the guy's name. There was somebody else who kind of came and helped a little bit. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do, and I don't remember his name.
Oh, now I feel terrible. Hopefully, I'm like, if you're listening, this is so embarrassing.
But I've had over 1,000 students, so
yeah, there's really no excuse for me. But anyways, it was pretty much me, you, and Danielle, and we would get to the lab at like 4:45 because testing would be at 5, and we'd get there, 4:30, 4:45, whatever, set everything up, and then be there for a few hours.
And hope the subjects show up to their appointment.
So my favorite thing about Campbell is always his realism, which when I first met you, I was like, this guy is so negative. But I realized as I've gotten older, like this is a really good technique to use because you're setting the expectations in a proper way. So basically I was like, hey, yeah, we should probably get this many people. You're like, no, you need to at least double this because half the people are going to drop out. And I'm like, oh my God, like half the people are going to drop out of my study. And well, yeah, not half, but it was close. We started with 39 and 23 finished. So there is a large dropout rate.
And how many people didn't even qualify? Probably you probably processed 80 to start with.
A lot of people. You have to start, and we didn't even have super stringent criteria. You know what I mean? And it still was that kind of a process. But I remember you were like, "Gotta recruit this many." I'm like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah, you got 39 people to actually sign the consent form. Yeah. So again, I don't remember how many people that you
more. But yeah, so let's get to it. So we, I get to the program, and it was like, all right, well, me, you, and Lane sat down. We had a discussion on like what would be a cool research project. And all I knew, I didn't go into it knowing that I wanted to do this. All I knew was that I wanted to do research because at Florida State, I had helped out with graduate. I was basically the Danielle for this guy for his research study, and it was really cool. And I was like, man, I really want to like do this. I don't know what I want to do, but I want to do this. And we all, threw out a bunch of ideas, and then we came up with, well, why don't we look at, IFYM essentially versus a meal plan, because this was 2014, heyday for like the IFYM craze, right? And everybody was like Pop-Tarts and egg whites, or you're a fucking bro and you're stupid, and like that was the times when we were doing this, right?
Yes.
So it was kind of like, all right, well we're the science crew, so like we'll look at a meal plan, and this hadn't been looked at in this way, and it still hasn't been looked at. There is another study that has looked at flexible dieting, but we can also share that citation if you guys want. But it was I believe it was an observational study. Remember?
Yeah, it clearly wasn't in a population of interest.
No, it was a good study, but it wasn't a
intervention-based.
Yeah, intervention-based. I'm like, why am I drawing a blank here? Great scientist. It wasn't an intervention-based study. So we were like, all right, why don't we do this? And when we decided to put this together, I started looking at, so when you come up with research, you have to have a basis for why you're doing something. So you want to review a lot of the literature that's current to say, okay, do we want to replicate something? Do we want to create something new? Or like, where are we pulling this from? Because the first process is getting it approved by the IRB, which is the Institutional Review Board, and you can't just be doing crazy stuff to people. You can't even do crazy things to animals, let alone people. So there has to be a rationale behind why you're doing something. Hey, here's this review of literature, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what our study is going to solve, essentially, is what that's looking at. So in my time of going through all these studies, I started to stumble upon the flexible versus rigid restraint models of eating, which was more kind of like the food psychology side. And then I also was finding a lot of the weight regain literature, and then taking my kind of practical experience as somebody who had gone through different diet phases, and I was coaching people, and I'm like, there's a lot here, right? And at that time, the working hypothesis was, not necessarily for our paper, but in the community, was flexible dieting is more flexible, and flexible dieting is more sustainable than eating off of a meal plan. Because again, try to put yourself in that like 2014 mindset of like bodybuilding land. It was very much like, here's a list of 6 to 8 foods. You eat this because I tell you to. If you deviate, you're a failure. Like that was kind of the culture that IFYM was coming from, right? And that was kind of where we were butting heads. So there was a lot behind why we were doing the study. And it was definitely challenging to try to pull it all together to make something that was able to be tested, because I can talk to people all day long, which is what I do essentially for a living, right? And I talk to people and I get their experiences and I make adjustments, but that's not science. That's not something that you can run through statistical analyses. So you do have to pick measurements that are going to be able to be studied, run stats on, and ultimately be replicatable if we want somebody else to do this.
Yeah, and like you said, I'm just thinking back to that time. It was like the shackles were off of the flexible dieting movement, essentially, because it was, you can't lose. And like many things, you were the first one to tell me, I think this flexible dieting is a real thing. And I remember just like, well, are you sure? Like I knew Lane, and then, but you were the one, and I was like, well, let's do it. We're going to do a study on this. Let's see. And now I live the whole, it's literally changed. You could say that's changed my life. It's changed and I had done obesity research as a grad student, but this was the first study that we'd done at USF in a resistance trained population under dieting conditions. So on many different fronts, it was novel and new, not just on the research idea, but also just in my own professional life. And then you as well, I think that shaped a lot of you, like your exit interviews kind of shaped you as a coach coming out of this study.
For sure. 100%. I wouldn't have had the same perspectives that I do now. Maybe I would have arrived to them in some capacity, but in a very different way, maybe a longer period of time. So we came up with this, and I'm like, all right, let's try to pull something together that captures all of this. I want to capture the food psychology. I want to capture the weight loss. I want to capture the weight regain. And I knew what access we had in the lab, right? And that's one of the big things with research that is hard when you're looking at a paper. And I do this too. I look at a paper and I'm like, oh, well, they could have changed that. Or this would have been so great. And now that I've done research, I look at it in less of a condescending lens and more of a, oh, that would have been cool, but I know why they probably didn't do it, right? Even down to like when people do training studies. Literally, you'll be like, why did they do those exercises? It's what they fucking had in the lab. That's why they did those exercises. You know what I mean? Like there's always limitations. So there are very few studies that I read that I'm like, wow, this is like peak research where I wouldn't really change anything. I think honestly one of the only studies that I've ever read like that is the Matador study, just because it was so well run and they gave all of the food to the participants.
That's
like,
what
that
amazes
is
me.
So that, outside of them just living in the lab, which really wouldn't replicate normal, like their normal movement anyway, so that could actually change stuff.
Yeah.
The fact that they gave them all the food. Anyways, another great paper. We can cite that as well for you guys. We talked about that on one of our other podcasts. It's a diet. It was essentially one of the hypotheses behind diet breaks.
Yes.
But anyways, so trying to combine all these different things. What do we have access to? What can we do? What do we have funding to do? What do we have? Right, there's all these different components. So what we landed on doing was we wanted to look at body composition changes during a diet as well as a post-diet period. So we have access to two different types of body fat measurement tools. So we have calipers and ultrasound, and we've again talked about this. Like we're very staunch believers in using ultrasound and calipers for body fat testing in comparison to some other methods,
especially for our population of
Yes.
lean people.
Exactly.
There's arguments to be made that, well, you couldn't use calipers in an obese population. They wouldn't work.
Yeah, no, it can be a lot more challenging. The leaner somebody is, the easier it is to take their body fat. And also, practically speaking, we have a small study. When you have a population level study with thousands of people, it's going to be really hard to do other body comps. So yeah, put them on a DEXA. That doesn't take very long. So we have access to that. We have access to the RMR, the resting
Yes.
metabolic rate. So essentially how many calories you're burning at rest. We can do that. We purchased what I think was probably the best questionnaire to look at, somebody's food psychology, like kind of their behavior and what they're thinking with food.
Yeah. And when you say food psychology, it's eating behavior is another term that people use. So it's either one works.
And clearly there was only so much that we could do there because this wasn't in the psych department, et cetera, et cetera. But the 3-factor eating questionnaire was actually a big basis of where I found the different types of restraint models, and all of these papers were referring back to this. So I was like, all right, this seems to be very validated. Seems to be a really good.
To this day, it still is.
Yeah, and it's been around for
since 1985
Yeah.
was the original validation study of that what they now call the eating inventory.
Yeah.
3-factor eating questionnaire is what was validated, and they changed the name. I don't know why.
And what I liked about it too was because what I was finding with some of the other ones was that it very much was like any time that you reported some type of deviation from what was supposed to be the norm, it was like, oh, eating disorder. And it's like, no, this isn't what we're trying to capture. Like, we're also trying to capture things like restraint, which is what, and disinhibition and, all these different types of things. So it's a really good questionnaire. And then lastly, big fuck up of all time, we did not have access to a phlebotomist. We don't have, especially then, I mean, even now probably not, but even especially then, there was no way that we were going to be able to take blood with the resources that we have,
not on the budget that we had,
and the budget that we had. So it would have been great to get blood work done, which is one of the things that I would have loved to do. But we decided to do salivary leptin, which leptin is a marker. Explain what leptin is. You'll probably explain it better than me.
So the way that I describe leptin to a general population, it's basically a hunger hormone. The higher levels you have, that's associated with higher body fat levels. So one thing that is predictable, when you lose body fat, you lower your plasma leptin levels. And when you gain body fat, because fat tissue secretes leptin, one of the primary tissues of the body that secretes leptin. So when you increase body fat, you increase leptin levels. So leptin kind of follows fatness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why, you might hear people talk about refeeds, helping with leptin levels, and it's like, it's transient, but if you're lean enough, it doesn't matter how many carbs you have, your leptin is not spiking that much, like for a substantial amount of time. But in any case, we were trying to see, is there, again, some kind of correlation here with leptin levels rising, falling, what's going on, not just in the diet phase. Obviously in the diet phase, we're going to be pretty certain that leptin levels are going to be dropping, but what's happening during the post-diet phase. So that was our rationale behind using the salivary leptin. And again, why did we do saliva versus plasma, or blood draw? We didn't have the funds or the capability to send everybody to Quest, or to do it in-house. So that's sometimes, again, when you're reading papers, look at that as the drawback. Why did they use this? Well, that's why. So I say it was a giant fuck up because we basically saw no results.
Well, and then when you say no results, what we learned, because we were very pioneering to look at this in a lean population. Mm-hmm. Lean people don't have much body fat. So if you don't have much body fat, guess what you don't have much of? Leptin levels. Yeah. So the salivary test wasn't able to detect the low levels that our subjects had. So when we got the results back, it was a lot of non-detectables. Yeah. It was so much so that we couldn't really do anything with the data. Yeah. But live and learn. We tried.
Exactly. Never do that again. Salivary cortisol does work pretty well. So in my mind, I was like, oh, salivary cortisol, salivary leptin, like these things are great. And I'm like, why would you even offer this if this is a shit test? But in any case.
Well, I think in obese people, it would have been fine.
Okay. Yeah.
It's just.
And also, it was, again, 10-week study, the whole deal, right? So, but so those are our main measurements that we're looking at. And of course, body weight trends over time. So we're looking at body composition, metabolism, thinking that we're looking at leptin, and also
eating
behaviors. So it was really what we considered a well-rounded, and I still consider it to be a very well-rounded study. There's obviously some things that I would have changed, but that's what we were working with to start. And did you have any thoughts going into this? Now we can talk about it because it's like everything's already published, so it doesn't matter. But
yeah, what did I was so, my only experience up to that point in time was obese, mainly females. Actually, all obese females. This study was in males and females. Mm-hmm. So this was, I think my whole mindset going into this was, let me just learn so that I know we can, I can see where our bottlenecks are. One of the things was we only had one RMR machine, and I was fearful if that breaks, negative Nancy here. Like, I don't want to not have that measure. So we did get funding, and that was, we bought a second metabolic rate machine, and I was so happy. I was like, okay, at least we can not worry about that. Because in research, the way that I tell all my students, have a backup plan for everything. Every meeting, who's your backup if you can't be there? Every testing session, who's your backup? All your equipment, if that equipment breaks, which it will, what's your backup plan? So we were able to, I felt very good. Like, our backup plan was calipers if the ultrasound broke, at least we had something. So that was my mindset, like just worried, like what's going to go wrong. This was our first, and I don't know if you remember, we were conservative in our IRB as well.
Yeah, because we got it wasn't rejected, it was deferred.
Oh, that's right. That was the first deferment.
First time.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
I was like, oh, what does this mean? And you were like, I've never been deferred in all of the papers that I've written.
Deferred means there's so many things we want you to change. Come back to us after you've done this next semester.
And that pushed our study back a whole fucking semester, because the way that it worked was that it was a 10-week diet phase, a 10-week post-diet, and a 2-week baseline data gathering. So again, when you look at this, if you're doing this at a university, you have to be aware of the restrictions, and the restrictions for this particular case is, well, semesters, right? Like school, people coming back, if it's spring break or not, right? Like, so there's all these different things that can happen. So in any case, it did get deferred because I think really there wasn't any other study for them to base this off of, and they, were basically taking people who are, there were some people who were at a higher body weight, but still within a normal-ish range. And we were saying, hey, we want to diet these people. And they're looking at it on paper saying, this is really aggressive. And then there's, I'm like, this is not aggressive at all. But again, I understand, maybe where they're coming from. So we had to make some adjustments to, like, basically we had a contingency plan for if X happened for their caloric goals, or based on their RMR, projected stuff, etc. We had these different contingencies of where we wouldn't drop their food below. So that was kind of where we started. Okay, 2-week baseline period, and then 10-week diet, 10-week post-diet. And the one thing that I would have loved to do, but we again just did not have the access at all at this point, was controlling training, or at least having some type of basically anything better than what we had, which was, hey, don't change anything, right? Which, ultimately, again, you have to do what you have to do. There's the only thing, we weren't able to do anything differently than that. And what we did was we recorded minutes. We said, hey, how many minutes of resistance training, how many minutes of cardio are you doing per week? Try to keep this as similar as possible. In a perfect world, we would have, of course, controlled that too, so that there would have not have been any changes. But that's really hard, because you can't say, hey, everybody's doing the same training program, because then you run into those issues as well. Because if me and you and the people at this office or in the study, well, we all have different training backgrounds, right? So that's
you
also
introduce other problems.
It's almost like I say, oh, I wish we could have done that, but then it's also like, I don't know, maybe I don't wish that, because that would have created another
well, I'll add to that. Issue. Where our lab is going now, where the profession is going, is you have people continue doing what they're doing under a supervised model. So as we bring, right now for recruiting subjects, we get their current resistance training, volume, intensity, all of that. Then we seek to match that as close as possible in our setting, which my lab is, we have almost everything you would want. So that way you do eliminate what you just said, increasing the volume of some subjects, decreasing the volume in others. You keep it the same, but it's still supervised. Yeah,
and the supervision is key. But then, of course, that drops people out who could attend the study. And not everybody who did our study was from here or was a student. We had a lot of people who weren't. I mean, I had a friend who's now a client. She drove all the way down from Tallahassee to do this, you know what I mean? And it was awesome. And, they had to come 5 times, so that's a big commitment. But if she had to train there every week, obviously she wouldn't have been able to do it. And it's other people too, if they have, different jobs or they're in different parts of town. Like, it's just, they're, again, when you get something positive in research, you're going to take away from something else. And, so it's pros and cons all the way around. And you just have to kind of accept, all right, well, there could be some findings here that we can't attribute necessarily to just the diet, because we don't know about the training. But at the end of the day, that's kind of like everything, right? Like, you can't just control every little aspect unless you're doing a live-in study where somebody like literally lives at a facility, which is obviously crazy. Yes,
and even then, like you said, then it doesn't mimic real life, and you're putting in artificial environments essentially. So yes. There's still a lot of studies that are published that do exactly what we did. Mm-hmm. In fact, the The exception is a supervised resistance training study, because now you've just increased the workload by about
And
3
now,
times.
if you're looking at training outcomes specifically, I mean, of course, you know what I mean, but ours was a mainly dietary intervention based study, and we need to just, keep tabs on this. So it is a little bit different. You
Yes,
can't
good
just be
point.
like, hey, we're trying to examine the effects of this different type of, loading schemes or this amount of volume, and be like, yeah, just go do the training. Like, that's not gonna work. You know what I mean? Because you just don't know. And we wish everybody was truthful, but sometimes people, maybe they did more, maybe they did less. Like, you really don't know unless you're there. So if it is a training study, that obviously needs to be supervised. But again, I don't think they're all probably supervised. No.
It's amazing. And the other, just a little pet peeve of mine, these training studies, they don't control for protein intake. So how do you know that one group didn't ingest more protein? Yes, but
Yeah, we're definitely big on that, and we can talk about at the end how the lab has changed in that regard. But so we have all the plan. We're like, all right, this is what we're going to be looking at. Really excited. So we gathered all these people. That was a whole process in and of itself. Like, please come to our study. We have no money or no funds for you, but don't you love research? Like, it was like, what? But, obviously enticing people with like, hey, you can learn stuff, here's a free diet, like you can get your body pumped on.
yeah, free metabolism testing.
Yeah, like there's, there were clearly some benefits for people who were interested. And there were people who just did it, I know, because they were like, we want to help science, this is a cool study. So the 2-week baseline period was basically just us gathering the data from all of the 39 people who signed the consent form and were able to be qualified for the study. Again, I can't even remember how many people I'll do it, signed up, but then once we got to the nitty gritty of the details, they had to be within a certain age range and have at least trained for a year. So, not like, bodybuilder status, but like at least resistance trained for a year. So it wasn't just total newbies. In case they did go and change anything crazy, we weren't going to see some big changes there. So,
and then also not actively dieting for, was it 6 months? I don't remember, but there's some. You don't want somebody entering your dieting study that's been dieting for the last 3 months. Like that's,
that wouldn't really work out, because we're like, hey, you're going back on a diet. So I don't think those two will probably like, yeah, get me the fuck out of this study anyway. So we did the 2-week baseline period, and we were gathering a 3-day food log. So 2 days during the week, 1 day during the weekend. This is just a classic dietary recall. Write down everything that you ate. And this is where the real bitch of the grunt work kind of comes in. You have to look at, okay, what did somebody eat? I need to plug this into, USDA Gov, whatever that website is with all the macros. And I had to do this in undergrad too to help out people, but they soak it up. Like, I used to get all the testing I wanted done, so I was like, yeah, I'll help input data for you guys. I was like the only person who actually wanted to do exercise science, so like they were excited. So I was like, okay, I'll help out, and then I'll get like these texts, right? Cool. So you had to enter all that, figure out again, where somebody's at, what they're saying, and then we had to match that with their RMR. So do you want to talk about what we did for the dietary intervention based on that, like our little triage model?
If I can remember the triage model. So in a perfect world, the subjects filled out their current caloric intake, and we instructed them to reduce their calories by 25%. And that's great. But what if a subject fills out their food form, their food record form, and they say they're eating 800 calories? Let's just pretend. Do we really want to, and is it ethical to put them on a 600 calorie meal plan or flexible dieting plan? So we said no, and even if we didn't, the IRB would have.
Yeah, I was like, we would have seen some cool shit, but we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, so clear. Inherent with this is people underreport. So if a subject says they're eating 800 calories, it's probably 1,200 or 1,400. So we made the decision. Let's in that case, when it's, I think we set our largest filter at 1,200 calories. If they were reported less than 1,200, if there was a mismatch between their intake, a large enough mismatch between their intake and their RMR, then we took 15% off their RMR. So that was the first filter. Yeah. It was the RMR comparing it with. Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes yes.
And then if either of those resulted in less than 1,200 calories, we only stopped there. Like that was as low as we went. Like
At 1,200, yeah, that's right.
Some people, based on both of those numbers, it would have been 1,000 calories, right? And we only had to do that for 2 people, but we had to cap theirs at, okay, both of those are, not working, but we're still only going to drop it to 1,200. And like I said, that was only 2 people out of the 39 who started. So we get all this information.
And they were in opposite groups, which was nice.
Yeah, which was perfect. So we were like, all right, and then that's what you have to do at the beginning. You sort everybody out, and it is a randomized control trial. Like we weren't just saying, oh, who wants to be in the flexible group? Who wants to be in the rigid group? Like you're not allowed to do that. And obviously that does bring limitations to some degree, because then people are like, hey, I wanted to be in that group or that group. But that you have to randomize it based on science, and we did that in a way that was matched on fat mass. So again, at the start, you're trying to make groups as even as possible, so that you're not having one group that's starting at, hypothetical number, 20% body fat, and the other group is starting at 15%. I don't even know if that would be statistically significant, but it's a large enough change that it's like, that seems a little odd. Like you're probably going to see a larger decrease in the group that's averaging 20% versus the group that's 15%.
Yeah, they have more fat to lose.
Exactly.
So yes.
So you want to have it as even as possible, and because this was a dietary intervention starting with fat loss, we based it off of fat mass, because that just makes sense.
And for nerds that like to read research, you'll see a word called randomization. You always want to see that word. If you don't see that word randomized to their groups, that's a big red flag, because the researchers essentially stack the odds in favor of a given group or outcome.
Love when people do that. Just keep myself quiet there. But anyway, so we're kicking this off. We're really excited. Do the baseline, randomize everything, and then here we go. There's 2 groups getting the different plans. So they're going to get the meal plan group, pretty straightforward. There was a meal plan constructed by a dietitian. Now it did have options. So this is where, again, it did differ a little bit than, let's say, bodybuilding world, where, there's this really, really, really rigid meal plan group. But we were like, let's be honest, nobody's gonna fucking do this if we show them, we're like, hey, tilapia and almonds,
then that's it.
Yeah, it's gonna be like, that's a no for me. So we really wanted to limit as many dropouts as possible while still making it a rigid meal plan, but there were several options that they could choose from, right? But that's pretty straightforward. So like, hey, here's your meal plan, here are your choices, stick with this every day.
And let's just give an example. If the meal plan said lean beef, and they're like, well, I don't like beef, can I have chicken? Yes. It was like lean beef, chicken, a lean fish, and that might have been like, so it was still very limited, but.
It was limited, but there was options if you wanted, okay, whatever, like you said, like different meat sources, different carb sources, just a few rotations, so it wasn't so miserable and everybody just quit after the first day. So that was the one group, that was the rigid group, and then the flexible group was tracking macros. So they were, we gave them their 3 targets, and then we did give them an ebook on how to track macros. And the reason we couldn't give them coaching, right, because remember, this is randomized. So there are people in the group who had tracked macros before, and there are people in the group who didn't know what a macro was at all. And it would have been like, oh, well, let's help them, right? Because they're struggling. Because the meal plan is pretty straightforward. Like, hey, you got a measuring cup, like, you got that, like, you're good to go. But with the macro group, there's a time period where you need to invest to understand how to do it, which we'll get to. But we couldn't help those people because that would be biasing the research. So we had to say, hey, here's this book on, the basics of how to track, and we wish you the best. And there was a few people who were struggling, but it wasn't anything like, oh my God, what is this thing? Like, as always, there was gonna be struggles. And just like in the rigid group, there were people who had tracked before and they're like, I don't need this fucking meal plan, right? But like, again, that's just kind of the luck of the draw, kind of had to be in there. And let's talk about the diet composition too, which I think is important. As far as like the breakdown.
During the diet, I'm gonna have to look. Now, I'll say this before looking. Generally, you mean like percentage of protein, carbs, fat? So generally what happens when we put our subjects on these diets, it's about a third carbs, a third protein, and a third fat. So I can tell you without even looking, it's gonna be close to that. So during the diet, it was,
Pretty much, yeah.
The flexible dieting, exactly. 34% carbs, 33% protein, 33%.
But we did set the protein at grams per kilo. We did 2 grams per kilogram,
Yes.
which is the highest amount basically that I think it's from the NSCA recommendations. I think they're the highest.
Yeah, it was NSCA and ISSN at the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're up to 2 grams per kg. So we wanted to have high protein, and then we said 50-50 split with the rest of the calories between carbs and fats, which pretty much ends up looking, like you said, a third.
Yep, and that's exactly what it was for both groups, essentially.
So it didn't matter, what group you were in, how much you dropped. That was the same across the board. So it was relative to every single person. So they were essentially on the same type of deficit. Obviously, the numbers looked different to them. So that's another thing. Like if you just said, hey, we're putting everybody on a 1,500 calorie meal plan. Well, that's not fair to the 6-foot male. Also, probably not fair to the 5-foot female, right? Like 2 completely different bodies, 2 completely different metabolisms, muscle mass, etc. So everything is to that individual and tailored to them. So kicked it off, started it, and I'm just like, all right, I really hope this people come back in 5 weeks. And like that's where like the real pressure sets in, because it's like you do all this work with the initial group, and then you're just hoping and praying because you have to send out like, hey, we're scheduling, because we have to do the measurements fasted. So we have to tailor to the group who has to go to work and has to wake up early, or the group that is in college and sleeps in. So it was like, all right, from 5 to 11 we have these spots, and we would do that for the full week to get everybody in. So that week was just like mayhem, because it was just like, absolutely killer to try to get everybody done, to be efficient, hope nothing like blows up in that time, you know what I mean? Hope people aren't missing. Scheduling is always just like a nightmare. And I'm sure you guys have handled that a lot more seamlessly now than we did.
When you also hope your equipment doesn't break on Monday, because if the equipment breaks Monday, that's the first day of your testing. That's unless you can get it fixed by Monday afternoon.
Yeah, and
it's a lot of stress.
Oh my God, there's so much stress, and it was notoriously the 5 a.m. or the 11 o'clock appointment that was always either late or didn't show up. Never like the middle people, always the first and always the last one. Either just strolling all in, or just like, oh, sorry, I didn't come. And you're like, fuck. And then you're trying to adjust with everybody else, because what we would be doing is we would be like, when I was doing body comp, then Danielle would be doing RMR, and then we'd switch, and it was just like, again, it was just absolute mayhem. And now, there are so many easier ways that I know of to schedule things. Like I would set this up so differently now. Less about changing stuff on the paper, but more about like how we handled all that. Like Acuity, it's an online scheduler, and it's so easy. Like you could be like, you have an hour block, and you literally set out the times and the days, and then you send out that link and you say, okay, pick yours. And then if you pick a 6 a.m. block on Monday, well, that's now blocked out for everybody else, so they know it's not even an option. And it literally eliminates all back and forth. There's text reminders, there's email reminders. Like, it is so easy. But we're doing everything super old school, like sending out emails, like hoping they answer their phone, and like people just not like, just total mayhem. But it was great. We made the best of it. We definitely had fun with it. And so we did the test. So for the diet phase, we did not make any changes during the diet phase. And we thought about that, right? We thought, okay, if somebody's not losing, or if somebody is dropping a lot, like what are we going to do? But ultimately that just gets a little dicey, and it only was a 10-week deficit, which isn't that long. But because we wanted to do that post-diet phase, we weren't able to really make that any longer, because baseline, diet, post-diet, now we're looking, like I said, 22 weeks. You really can't get much longer than that for a university-based study.
Not if you don't want to have to deal with Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, spring break, which are pitfalls for dieting studies.
Yeah, and just people leaving. What if the week we need to test is that, it's just...
Yeah,
it just doesn't.
And there were people that didn't lose much fat, and there were people who lost a ton of fat. We obviously made the decision. We're not gonna give you special instructions of why you're struggling, like you would if you're a coach. Like you'd be a broke coach if you did this. Yeah. But for our study, it is what it is.
You have to, and you don't want to have any bias, and you don't want to, So basically, for those 10 weeks, we had people come in twice, so at the mid mark and then at the end of the diet, and we did all at baseline, at the end of the diet, and at the end of the post diet, we administered the eating inventory, so that questionnaire that we talked about in the beginning with the eating behaviors. But then everything else we did every single time, because we were trying to get as much data as we could there. And the questionnaire wasn't like that long, but it was just like an added amount of time, and we want to make people like want to actually fucking come back to this thing. So we're just like, okay, like we're gonna make it as easy as possible. And really, in 5 weeks, you're not gonna see a huge difference in like your eating behaviors. You might see some body comp changes, but you're probably not gonna see many eating behavior changes. So we did all that for the dieting phase, and then at the end of that, we said, okay, no more intervention, but just come back again twice. So come back at that 15-week mark and that 20-week mark. So 10 weeks post-diet as a follow-up. But the follow-up essentially was just, we want to see what you're doing, because part of the hypothesis was that the more rigid that somebody's diet is, the less sustainable it is. Therefore, they might have this weight regain and this rebound that is influenced by the rigidity of their diet.
Yeah, and I don't know if you said it, you probably did, but during the 10 weeks, there were no instructions. It was, live your life. We don't want, if you've been tracking, great, keep doing it if you want, but if you don't want to track, don't track.
People
there was
like,
nothing,
I like
no
this meal plan. I'm like, cool, keep using it, right? You can use your meal plan. You can use these macros. You can do whatever. I don't care if you decrease your food, increase your food, go, balls out, eat whatever you want, right? Like, again, we weren't really seeing that with people because it wasn't a competitor study. It wasn't like they got so lean, right? That it was, any kind of like blowout binges that were happening or anything like that. But we just said, hey, go and do that. And really where I gathered a lot of my information, which again, part of me wishes I would have put together some type of like Likert scale or more questions that maybe even just for me that I could have just seen in a more statistical manner, but I would just ask people, because I couldn't coach them obviously, and I couldn't, but I would just kind of prod, I'm literally prodding, I'm doing the body comp, but I'm asking just, hey, how's it going? Are you, what are you liking about this? What are you not liking about this? Just to kind of get a feel for like what was happening with everything, because most people, especially if they don't know you and it's like 5 a.m. and you're pulling on them to do calipers, they're not like just chatty Cathy, like hey, how's this diet going? You really gotta ask people like, what's going on? And I was just interested in observing the patterns with them to see, are they liking the meal plan? Are they hating it? Are they going off plan? Are they enjoying this? Are they confused? And I knew it wasn't gonna be in here. I just knew it was more for me. But again, wish I would have maybe had like a little few questions. Yeah, just a few questions. Hey, are you, how adherent are you? Are you enjoying your plan? Are you, like, just a few questions like that. I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done that. But again, there was already so many things we were doing that it's just hindsight's 2020, right? Yeah,
and everything that you add, it's more likely that subjects don't stay in the study. Exactly. Every little thing you do, assume that that's the straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak.
Because you have to remember, these people are coming in for my study 5 times for roughly an hour for free. I mean, they are getting testing done, which costs money. So that's pretty cool. And they're obviously getting a diet plan and, maybe a free ebook and whatever, so they're not getting nothing out of it, but ultimately they're giving us their time. Yeah. And they're giving us 20 weeks to be, or really 10 weeks to be adherent, 20 weeks to do the same fucking training, hopefully. So you have to take what you get. And, for paying somebody, $100 a session, yeah, I'm gonna ask you fucking 500 questions, you know what I mean? But like, we're not doing that. So what I did find though, which was interesting, is that, like I said, I guess it's expected, but because we randomized it, there were people who were struggling in each group, but for different reasons, right? People who were thrown into the macro group who were like, I don't know what this is. Like is peanut butter a carb? Like that kind of a thing. Is butter a carb? So very confused. And then there's also people who were in the meal plan group who were like, I can't stand this. Like, I've been tracking macros for 3 years. Like, I love being able to eat whatever I want. This is awful. And then vice versa. Then there was people who were like, raving about the meal plan. Like, this is the best thing they've ever done. And they were like, I'm so happy to finally like understand portions and understand like what a good day of eating looked like, because I maybe wasn't making the best choices before. And then there's other people who were like, I've been doing macros, or I'm kind of new to this, but I'm enjoying it. It's easy and I got it. So there was a very wide range of responses, but really what that initially taught me that I was able to take away immediately was, wow, we need to stop being so judgmental about the method, and it really matters about where the person is. And I, back when we started discovering this, I just started calling it like there's, people need different levels of food education. And when you don't have any food education, something like a meal plan is really useful because it tells you what to eat, tells you how much to eat. And then when you have more food education and more knowledge, you're able to have, a more flexible approach, and you're able to make better choices with a wider variety of foods. But when you're first starting, that's really overwhelming. But the whole IFYM group was like beating it to everybody's heads, like meal plans are going to give you an eating disorder. And they're like, oh my God, nobody should ever eat a meal plan. Like everybody in the world should track. I was like, everybody in the world should track macros. Like it's the superior way of dieting. It's the most precise. It makes the most sense. Like science, which mind you, there was literally no science behind this whatsoever. Like no science behind this whatsoever. We were like doing the study. But it really made me take a step back and go like, wow, maybe I was wrong to tell people that they should be tracking their macros when clearly they were confused. And I was like, no, you'll get it. And I was like, no, they don't need that, And not saying that I stopped everything that I was doing and going and wrote 100 meal plans, but the idea that there is this like continuum was really, really important. And that was something that at the time I really hadn't recognized yet.
Yeah, it wasn't a one size fits all was what, probably.
Yeah. And, call that like naive or stupid or narrow-minded, I don't know, but I just wasn't in the headspace at that point to understand that. And part of that's just experience. I would have clearly arrived at that indicator at this point by now in my career. But then, just a few years in and finding something that really worked for myself and a lot of people, you think, oh, this is probably a better method, because all I was seeing at that point was the backlash from the meal plans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you're seeing that, what's that phrase, which I always mess up phrases, but the hammer and the nail.
Yeah. When you're a hammer, the world is a nail.
Yeah, that.
Something to that.
Something like that. I don't know why. I always bring up phrases and then I'm like, I know a phrase, and then I don't know it, and then I have to ask somebody else, like, is this it? So the hammer and the nail one, right? Like you start seeing only the dark side of these meal plans, and you think, oh, they must be bad for everybody.
Yeah, and then if that makes sense. If that's all you're hearing, and maybe you're even attracting. What was your coaching business like at that time? I
was still small, but I was coaching, and I had just started in 2013. Had a few clients, started growing it, and I would say at the time when I was doing the study, I had a small handful of clients, and we were all doing like, hey, we're going to start tracking, and this is a good idea, and not that it's a bad idea.
No,
obviously.
But you were probably one of the pioneers of flexible dieting in that coaching space. So I can appreciate you are getting all of the horror stories, and you're getting a reality is being posed to you, which is not the reality of the general population of dieters.
Yeah, or really, even anybody, right? Which is now what we'll get to down the line, which is now my realizations years later of kind of what this all means. So in my mind, we're doing all this, and I've read all the backstory on flexible restraint, rigid restraint, and I'm like, oh yeah, the rigid, meal plan, like black and white thinking, not making substitutions, very impulsive. Like this sounds like everybody who eats off of a meal plan, right? Again, at this time. And then, okay, well, what is the flexible restraint? Okay, well, more moderation, able to adjust for things, before and after. Like if you're going somewhere, you'll eat a little bit less early or a little bit less the next day. Or you just have a more moderate approach with food. You're able to have a better, successful long-term weight maintenance, and all these things. Flexible restraint must equal flexible dieting, right? Like that's just kind of how we wrote the whole thing. Like that was very intertwined in the paper, like because rigid group, flexible restraint, rigid restraint, like that was all intertwined together. So down the line, I definitely learned that was not the case, but that was through much more experience. So let's get to the results, because I do think that they are unique, and shout out to our boy Eric Helms for coming up with a very, very unique hypothetical response. And we'll never be able to know, because that's just kind of how research is, and you just kind of go out on a limb and make interpretations. But one of the main the one finding for the diet phase was that there were no differences.
Yes, both, whether you were rigid dieting or flexible dieting, you can expect to lose approximately or statistically the same amount of weight and fat mass, regardless of your method, as long as the caloric deficit is the same.
Mm-hmm. Which it was, because we talked about in the beginning, that's how we set everything up. So, okay, cool. Didn't see any differences, which, again, intuitively, we kind of all knew at that point, like, all right, well, this macro thing is working. And the pushback to that was that this doesn't work. Like, the pushback of tracking macros was that doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like, you need to follow this more rigid thing.
Yes.
You're just going to be eating shit food. You don't really know what's in it. You're probably not being accurate, all of these things. The meal plan, pretty straightforward. 4 ounces of chicken. Guess what? You're going to measure 4 ounces of chicken, right? Like, instead of saying 32 grams of protein, well, where are you pulling that source from? And where are you searching that? Da-da-da. So the pushback was, it's not going to work, was clearly false. Okay, this works, so that was exciting, which we expected. And oftentimes in research, it looks way more exciting when you find things, like when there are statistical significances, you're like, yeah, like this is great. But we were actually excited, like, cool, there's not really a lot of differences, like that means you can kind of just do what you want. Not really exciting for publishers, but
And I'll add, it's obvious and it makes sense in 2021. At the onset of the idea, that was not the
prevailing notion.
Yes, I think the majority of people think you're not going to lose weight doing a flexible diet. So, I mean, I think you believed.
There was a subgroup of us who did believe.
Yes.
And had experienced it, but
yes,
it was not the norm.
Yes.
Whatsoever.
So again, we were talking about in 2021. I think it's hard for me to even. I fail to appreciate what this did at that time.
There's so many changes. So no differences across pretty much every measure. And then for the post diet, same thing. We really didn't see any statistically significant differences amongst all. We measured a lot of stuff, which leptin was pretty much null and void because we just couldn't really detect anything. But we looked at the eating inventory, so that questionnaire. We looked at fat mass. We looked at body weight. We looked at body fat percentage. We looked at RMR. Like everything was pretty much showing statistically, which doesn't mean that there weren't differences amongst the groups, but from statistics, no. But there was one measurement that was statistically significant from the other group, was that the flexible group increased fat-free mass in the post-diet period, and the rigid group did not. Did they lose? They didn't lose, or did they? I just know there was a difference.
I think they gained a small amount,
but it wasn't enough.
Nope, I was wrong. They actually lost about a pound and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why there was such a big. We were like, I remember I was doing the stats, and you were like, "Whoa, this is like a really big. Like this is like a strong finding. Like this isn't just like we're like crossing our fingers and our toes, and we're gonna find something. Like this was like." An actual, and we were like, maybe we did something wrong.
Well, especially in a host of other non-significance, equal, and then there's this one elephant in the room that says not equal.
Yeah.
And then, it was
like,
the flexible diet, the group that was previously flexible dieting, when they were in their post-diet phase, they gained a significant amount of fat-free mass compared to the rigid diet group. And real quick, fat-free mass doesn't necessarily mean muscle, but muscle follows fat-free mass. If you gain fat-free mass, I can say with certainty you've gained muscle. If you lose fat-free mass, I can say with near certainty that you've lost muscle. So I don't want to say that they're equal. They are not. Fat-free mass has water components, sizes of your organs, what else? Oh, connective tissue. So it's not solely muscle, but we can confidently say that muscle does follow those changes.
And ultimately, the only way to ever know precisely is to, somebody's dead and you open them up like a cadaver. You're never going to know anything perfectly. So you have to look at, okay, what's our best measurement here? And fat-free mass typically is that. So we were kind of like, all right, what does this mean? Like racking our brains. We're like, okay, let's see, are there differences? Are there differences amongst reported protein intake? No. Were there differences amongst time spent resistance training or time spent doing cardio? Statistically, no. If you look at the actual numbers, total calories. No. Now, if you look at the numbers, you could look at them at face value and say there are differences, right? Like it was, I think for
40 calories or something.
Yeah, 40 calories, or maybe it was 20 minutes of cardio, more or less, right? Like so, there are going to be differences, but on a like a large level and through all these statistical analyses. When you do this, when you say it's statistically significant, you're saying with 95% confidence. That's what we said the confidence interval. 95% confident that this would happen or be able to be replicated, right?
Yes.
So if you see P less than 0.05, that's what that means. So we were like, oh, what is, what is this? And, initially we threw around the idea, and this was actually something that, Helms had talked with us a little bit about, was, maybe the group that was in the rigid dieting group, they were a little bit more stressed out with kind of what they were doing versus the flexible group. And we kind of played with that too. And then I was like, but, again, this was not anything that I could track, but talking to some people seemed really relaxed in the rigid group and having a very easy time versus the people in the flexible group who weren't, right? Like, so there was we just called it a wash. I kind of washed my hands of this and said it was a wash. If somebody could replicate it, that would be cool. If they can't, that would also be cool. Like, I'm not hanging my hat on this to say, if you do a flexible diet versus a rigid diet, right? Like, if you track macros or you're on a meal plan, afterwards you're going to gain more muscle mass. Like, I would never say that to somebody.
But you could, because the data would support it.
The data does support it.
Because we can't explain it.
Yeah, cherry picking data at its finest. I read this study once. But I will say, so Eric did a write-up in Mass, which is their research review of the paper, which I thought was really, really nice. And the whole article was great that he wrote. But the one point that was really interesting, and I was like, wow, really wish I would have, thought of that, was basically the rigid group during the study, all they had to do was follow the meal plan. Obviously, that's what we gave them. The flexible group, presumably, I don't know, but presumably, they're tracking their macros every day in some capacity. They're either writing it down, they're making a self-created meal plan, they're using MyFitnessPal or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So they are developing this skill during the 10-week diet phase of tracking. In the post-diet period, the way that the numbers that we're talking about, that we're analyzing, like the protein intake and all this stuff, that is based off of the 3-day food log. So when we said to come back at week 15 and week 20, what we analyzed was a 3-day food log, again, like we did in the beginning, 2 days in the week and 1 weekend. And that's what we used to create these, to have these averages. And Eric's point was, well, the rigid group really didn't have any experience during the diet phase with tracking, so their food logs are likely less accurate. And when he referenced one of the numbers, which is all in the paper, they basically said that their average calories only increased by 150 from the diet to the post-diet phase, but they actually gained about 1 kilo of fat mass. So that really doesn't add up, right? Whereas the flexible group, if you looked, they reported on average adding more calories afterwards, but they didn't gain any substantial weight. So it actually does match up. Okay, you're reporting about this much, and this kind of makes sense. Whereas the rigid group was reporting, no, we didn't, kind of like how you said in the beginning, oh, I'm eating 800 calories. But really, are you eating 800 calories or are you eating 1,500, right? Yes. So it could have just been a simple reporting error from the skill that was not developed in the rigid group. So like, shout out to Eric, because that's the best explanation I've heard. I think you've heard. We like literally were banging our heads against the wall, like, what is this? And when you're so close to it, for so long, it can be really hard to detach like from all the things that you've like already seen. That's why it's like, when you write something and then you like send it to someone and they're like, why are there 4 typos here? And you're like, what? I proofread it 4 times. But it's just because you've looked at it and you've already corrected it in your mind and all these things. So I thought that was probably the best explanation. And that really speaks to the benefit of tracking. And me and Sam, a little teaser, in a few weeks we'll have a podcast, we just recorded so I can say that, on how to track macros, like a baseline one on all that. And we talked a lot about, one of the things outside of just like the obvious, like how to actually track this. Because I realized like we never have done a podcast on that. Like we always talk about tracking, but like if somebody's listening who's like, I've never tracked anything, like I don't know what this is. We actually broke
helpful.
Broke that down, right? But one of the things that's so beneficial about it is you're putting in this initial time investment to then now have a skill that can be developed and fine-tuned and used for the rest of your life, essentially. It's like, whereas with the meal plan, they can be beneficial, and they can give you that like start, and they can like that springboard to like, I don't like how I was talking to those people. I didn't know what to eat. I didn't know what foods to choose. I didn't know what portions. But at some point, that knowledge and that skill base is going to run out, because when you're presented with something that's not on that meal plan, then you're like, wait, is this the same amount of portion? Like, is chicken the same as sausage? Like, is it? Right? And,
can I do this?
And you're not sure. Whereas with tracking, you'd go, oh no, that's a higher fat option, so I'm going to have less fat with the next meal, or vice versa.
Or a smaller piece of the sausage.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll get protein somewhere else. So I think that where tracking really shines is if you use it in the capacity to build it as a skill that you can use, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I've come to the place where I think, I'm gonna say, if you eat food, now you may disagree with this, I'm curious to what you would say. If you're somebody who eats food, you should spend you should spend 6 months of your life tracking your food, because the education that you are now an educated food consumer. In 12 years, you're still going to know that butter is fat, that pasta is carbs, that a chicken breast is protein. I think the education that it provides you is invaluable as an educated, I don't want to say dieter, because you don't have to do this to lose weight.
No, the word diet is just eating food.
Yes,
people misconstrue that all the time.
Yeah.
I try to distinguish. I try to say calorie deficit when I try to talk about dieting. I mean, sometimes I still say dieting, but
yeah, I know. Yeah, you and I know scientifically, dieting is just what you eat. But we can both appreciate people here. Ooh, fat loss. Yes. So an educated eater.
It sounds way less way less cool. Like educated dieter sounds much better. So that's probably why we don't say it.
Yes. Yeah.
But no, I do totally agree with that. I think that the method, like learning to track, is absolutely invaluable. Now there are certainly times and places when it isn't necessary for certain people, because there are so many other things that need to do first, right? Like everything is on this kind of continuum, and I think that there's really big picture things that we need to get into place first and foremost. And if you are failing to hit those milestones, it's going to be really hard to track. And what's going to happen is if they don't hit those milestones and they try to track and then they fail, then they're really going to revert to the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like one of those things that it's like, all right, you really need to have a few things in place first, but it's completely invaluable if you actually take time to develop that skill. And now, developing it, refining it, all these things takes time, and nobody says that you need to be perfect. But like you said, once you figure out, oh, this is a serving of pasta, right? Like the servings are always pretty much the same. And then when you go out, you're like, all right, this looks like 3 servings, and there's like a cream sauce on it, right? Like that's not just like, oh yeah, I had a serving of pasta at dinner. No, you didn't. Now you know that you had 3. And likely a fat sauce on top of it, which is, again, fine, but you now know that you made that decision and what you should be doing outside of that.
Yes.
And I agree I think 6 months is just a good amount of time. Like, okay, maybe 3 months for some people, maybe a year for other people, whatever it is. But I think that if you're going to be like, all right, what's a really good baseline amount of time, that would probably be a safe answer, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll have you. I don't want to take this in a direction that you don't want to go. But let me ask you, and you can say, I'll handle that with who are you going to do the flexible eating podcast with? How to
tracking? We already did it.
Oh,
that's why I was saying teaser. We already recorded it. But it'll be out in a few weeks.
Okay, so you're the best coach that I know. I've told you that. I recommend people to you. I would say God has given you a coaching mind where you meet people where they're at. So here's where I'm at. So psychoanalyze this. I track. I'm a good tracker, a flexible dieter. When I'm not tracking, I don't do well. Mm-hmm. I know all of the macros. Let's say I'm tracking at 3,000 calories, and I hit that. And I like numbers. I like puzzles. So I love piecing it together. My mind works. When I stop tracking, when I put the MyFitnessPal down, I can't hit 3,000 calories. I go to 3,400. And my wife will say, but you know that those M&Ms are that. I'm like, I know. But if I'm not tracking, it's like it doesn't count. So I've just come to the realization, I'm just going to be a tracker until I die, and I'm fine with that. There's something about tracking to me that gives me discipline that I don't have. And you may say, well, that's a problem and you need to work through that. And to that I would say, maybe, but I'll just track. That gives me the discipline. What do you think about this?
So this is, I'm totally good to go here because this is what I wanted to discuss as kind of, okay, so we learned all these things, we analyzed everything, this is 2016, yay, like super excited, like I graduate, like life's good, right? And then we kind of put the paper away because life happens, my business is what I'm doing full time, busy, traveling, doing all the things. You have, a full career, a whole lab of people, the lab is growing, right? So we're just not really too concerned about the paper. And then, so as this time goes on, probably a few years, about like 2019, really, I start to realize the same issues that I was seeing with the rigid dieting, or the rigid restraint, or rigid dieting, I'll call it rigid dieting because I wasn't really distinguishing the two. Rigid dieting and meal plans and all these things. All the things I've read about, all the things that I've seen. I started to see the same things with my clients who were tracking macros. The same exact pathologies. And I said, I would just start to notice behaviors, right? Like that's where you start to learn things. You notice, okay, not one person did this, not two people did this, but 10 people who are very different all did the same thing. That's unique. Well, I need to look into this, right?
Yeah.
And I started to say, why when somebody goes on a vacation, they nail their diet when they're at home. They go on a vacation and they can't handle it. They, go have a date night. They crumble. They either restrict, they binge, they overcompensate, they exercise. Okay, that's a little concerning. I started to see all these same patterns, which is the exact pattern that we see that when somebody has a meal plan and they can't hit it, what do? They go the complete opposite way. Well, when somebody didn't have the macros that they could hit perfectly, they went the exact same way. And I saw people that I knew in person who couldn't weigh something, physically weigh it on a scale, and were then completely like melted. Like, I don't know what's in this. Is this 40 carbs, 50 carbs, 80? I don't know. And I'm like, all right, this is an issue. You know what I mean? And if somebody's telling me, they're saying I eat 3,000 calories or I eat whatever, right? And I'm always seeing these people and they're always eating salads. It's just easier for me to track. What do you mean it's easier for you to track? What isn't the whole point of tracking to be able to have something because you've been tracking for 4 years, so you should know what's in it, right? Like, So started recognizing these patterns. I was like, this is an issue. And then I started going back to what it was. It's not flexible dieting means flexible restraint. Flexible restraint is flexible restraint. And rigid restraint is rigid restraint. They are two different things. And a IFYM flexible diet can be just as rigid as a meal plan. So when I came to this realization, I wanted it to be abundantly clear in the paper. And I think that did a pretty good job with some revisions that I added. And
I tried to take one out and you said, put that back in.
Yeah, I was very adamant about it because there's so much, this is so pervasive now, that I don't want it to get misconstrued whatsoever. If anybody reads this paper, I don't want them going, oh yeah, flexible dieting is flexible restraint. I don't want one person to fucking think that, okay? So learn from my mistakes as a coach and even as a an athlete, competitor, person who eats food, a dieter. Learn from that because I fell into all those same pitfalls as a coach and a eater, competitive eater. Not yet, that's my next goal, but just kidding. Honestly though, if there's an ice cream eating contest, I'm in. No training necessary, I'm winning. I've never met anybody who can eat as much ice cream as me, so we'll just put that on the table. If you guys know of one, hit me up. Cash prize specifically. But I was so adamant about this because this has been such I rarely try to plant my flag in the ground, right? This is what we think. But I have just seen so many issues from this, and what we were trying to create with the IFYM community it is completely, like everything, the pendulum swang so far that it became, if your targets were 300 grams of carbs and you had 303 for the day, people were like absolutely fucking losing their mind. And then guess where now it's swung even more? Oh, well, tracking's bad. It gives you an eating disorder. So you should just never track anything. So now I'm like, whoa, gotta go on that train too. Like, gotta try to bring us back in here. Like, there are so many things, and that's just what happens with the industry, right? Everything that's extreme gets all the attention. It's really boring to learn to actually practice flexible restraint. Like, it's very boring. It's very cumbersome. It's not really exciting when you're checking in with your coach and you're like, it's just not, right? Because you're also going to fuck up a lot, which people don't want to do. And tracking is very soothing because, so it's soothing to certain people. And
I was going to say, certain mindsets for sure.
Certain mindsets, but especially people who are reaching out, like, and again, this is where I kind of I need to remove my bias, detach, because talking to anybody else versus the type of people that I see, people who are hiring an online coach are going to be very neurotic. They're going to be type A. They're going to be numbers people. Not all of them, but a lot of people who are coming to an online coach are going to be numbers-based people. They want to see numbers. They want to see results. They're not seeking somebody out if they're not doing that. You know what I mean? No, not everybody, but as a majority, I would say that that's where it is. So I'm seeing all of these people from that lens. Again, remember the lens I saw in 2014? Like, oh, I'm seeing all these problems with rigid dieting. Well, now, because I've been talking about this, the types of clients that we get, a lot of the clients that we get, are people who have gone past that place of tracking as a healthy mechanism for them, and it's become this obsession that grips them, and they can't eat without it. And that's what my whole gripe with it is. If you can't learn to eat without MyFitnessPal or without a food scale, that is a problem. So, to answer your question, to psychoanalyze you, I would say that a lot of people fall into this situation. And you're not somewhere where I'm like, this is pathological, like, oh my God, Dr. Campbell is like, has all these eating disorders and has all these problems. Like, no, I don't like to overhype things either, because there's certainly people who do that as well, and I don't want to contribute to the fear-mongering in any kind of sense, right? Or, is fear-mongering the word? Yeah, I guess. Like, fear-mongering, like, oh, flexible dieting is going to cause an eating disorder. Like, that would be a fear-mongering statement. I'm not saying that at all either. But I would say that ultimately what it comes down to is you do have all the skills, but you just are choosing not to apply them. And if I held a gun to your head and said, I need you to hit roughly these targets, but you're not allowed to track for 2 weeks, you'd fucking do it. You just don't want to do it because you're relying on MyFitnessPal, right?
I attribute it to a lack of discipline, but
part of it too is just you have to practice it. And what I do with a lot of clients to start is like, all right, we're not going to just pull the safety net off, right? Like, we're going to like slowly go into this. So I'm not just going to be like, yeah, you've been tracking every day for the past 5 years. Let's just not track at all this week. Like, that would be a lot. So I say, all right, let's, we have our same targets for the day, but I want you to estimate dinner. I'm not going to weigh it, not going to plug it in, but okay, at the end of the day, I have about 50 carbs, 50 protein, 15 fat, whatever, just fucking some numbers. You're going to make a plate that fits that. At home, you know what the food is. It's not anything that's crazy added from the restaurant. And we're just going to estimate it. We're going to do that for a few weeks. And then you can go out and you can order food that way. And so on and so forth. And you kind of build slowly from there. So I would say that it's hard because it is a complex answer. It's not that it's a problem until it becomes a problem. Until it becomes you can't manage without looking at your phone, like, oh my God, I can't eat this without logging it in. Or, which I don't know if this is happening, but I doubt it's happening, if you can't log something, then you go and you overeat, right? Which is typically what we see, where you undereat, right? What you just said, your variation is kind of small, right?
Yes, I'm definitely not getting uptight on 3 grams of carbs, or I don't weigh much things. I estimate a lot, but I intuitively overeat. Whereas if I'm tracking, I'm very good about not going over my ceiling.
Yeah, and again, that's when, when you guys were on that trip, were you like, oh my God, where's MyFitnessPal? Where is my... No,
I enjoyed the trip immensely.
Exactly. But you weren't also binging or over-exercising or overcompensating.
Didn't exercise at all. Well, other than some walks.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. Like, yes. You're like, I didn't do shit, actually. So like, maybe we do have a problem here. I'm just kidding.
My skin started getting grafted into the couch in the hotel room.
Like, I got bed sores from just sleeping all day. No, I mean, that's a week-long vacation that you never take, so I get it. But you know what I mean? There's a difference of when, is it actually an issue in your life, right? And if I were to say, the difference is, if I were to say, hey, you know, bring something on you, like, hey, want to go get dinner right now? There would be situations where clients would be like, I wouldn't know what to do. I would either not go or I would overeat. That's where I'm seeing the struggles that I want people to be able to work through with this type of rigid restraint. Because basically, if they weren't able to control, they weren't able to say, I know exactly what's in these numbers, it's not accurate, and then I'm just going to say fuck it in either direction.
Yeah.
Either I'm not going, this isn't important to me, which it is, or like I'm just going to go balls out when it could have just been a normal meal. Now, again, there's always context. There are certainly times where people can say no to going out to eat with friends, family, significant other. Like, I'm not saying you have to say yes to everybody all the time, because that can also throw people off, right?
Yeah.
There's always, like, there has to be a balance here, but the idea that somebody springs something on you and you can't navigate it does not show me that you have any type of flexibility in your mindset, and shows me that you're completely rigid. Are you 3 days out from a show? We're having a different conversation here. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, yeah, go and have some fucking tea. Like, shut up. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't go there, enjoy it. Like, you don't need to eat anything. Now, I would still say that you, again, I'm somebody who's always been very flexible with my restraint, just even when prepping, because it was kind of a byproduct of, I just did that. I'd have to eat out with traveling and all these types of things, and I would certainly control as much as I could, but there were definitely situations where I was a lot more flexible than maybe I should have been, but I still hit the target. It wasn't like I was going out and ordering lasagna, which I wouldn't order anyway because I don't like lasagna, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I was going out and ordering like plain fish and vegetables, so like, you know.
Yes.
But some people would say, no, you're not allowed to eat out during prep, and I would say, well, I have to, and I'm not going out of my way to do it, but I'm going to do it when I need to. So, as always, it's a really nuanced conversation. Did that answer?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
You're not labeling me as a psychological problem, nor do I think I have.
I'm like, well, we could talk about something else. I'm sure there's a label here we could create, but in that sense, no. And that's where it's like, all right, is tracking bad? Do you know, is it whatever? And I would say that if you have any type of body composition, performance, or even really health-related goals, there is going to need to be restraint in your life over your eating behaviors. You don't just get to have your cake and eat it too, right? Like, there has to be choices of, man, I probably don't really want to eat this right now, but this is probably the better choice for me to make. You know, I would eat tubs of ice cream every day, like we just talked about, if I could, every day. I choose not to, because that's not the best thing for my health, my performance, my physique. I would still do it, right? So I'm still displaying restraint, but that doesn't mean that I'm never having it at all, right?
Yes.
And it certainly means that I'm going to make better choices most of the time. Like the stuff that I keep around the house, I'm going to have better choices there. But then if I want to have something and go out and get it, I'm going to set aside time that I want to go do that. So I think that, but even if you don't track macros, right? So I don't track anymore, technically. I still track certain aspects of my life and my day. I don't just eat whatever. I have a whole fucking lunchbox in this fridge, like, you know what I mean, at the office. It's a cool Star Wars lunchbox. I'm very excited. I had to get that, of course. It's like a Star Wars comic all over it. Shout out to Igloo. I'm really pleased that they had that. But, you know, I'm still packing multiple meals. I'm having protein multiple times. Like, you know, so I'm still tracking something. For me, it's just not the 3 numbers.
Yes.
So I think that whatever somebody needs to track in order to be the best version of them for health, their physique, their performance, all of that, their cognitive function, like, that's really important. And different people are going to struggle with different things with food. Some people are going to chronically undereat. Some people are going to chronically overeat. So you are likely going to have a mechanism in place in order to keep that in check. Some people kind of just do whatever, and they're fine. But for a lot of people, they are going to have some type of restraint built in. My whole point with all of this is that having a flexible restraint is going to allow you to have less of those pathological issues, have less of those disordered eating tendencies, and be able to, you know, maintain all of this for a more sustainable period of time. Because really what I see that is such an issue is just this chronic yo-yo dieting. And we often hear that term just in kind of like the Gen Pop sense, but it really is not just Gen Pop, it's really everybody. And yeah, I'll kind of get off my soapbox there. Woo! Read the paper! Talk about it like 8 times in there. No, it's like 3 times, but I really, like I said, I really wanted that to be clear. And I think we made it clear.
I think after the 6th time that it was in there, it was abundantly clear.
I was like, oh my God, seriously? I was like, yes, we are putting this in. Because it just sounded like a very harsh paper of like, IFYM's great. And it was like, that's not what I wanted to just get across.
Yeah.
Because nobody else understood the bigger picture here, right?
Yes.
And that's, you know, you can't change the methods, you can't change the results, but you can add things in the discussion. And it's not changing the paper, it's just simply expanding on certain topics.
Your interpretation.
Exactly. So we just really wanted that to be clear for everyone. And I hope you guys read it because we put a lot of work into it, and
it's free.
And it is free. Yes, I'm very happy about that. And JISSN has other great articles too, which are all open access. So it's a really awesome journal if you are, you know, interested in reading scientific literature. You're not really sure where to start. For sports nutrition, it's probably one of the better ones in my opinion. And again, they're all open access. They have position statements too on certain things, especially like supplements like creatine. There's a great position paper on creatine. Any fucking question you ever had about creatine, they answered it, and there's like a million citations for other papers if you want to read more about the specific mechanisms and et cetera, et cetera. So really great journal. Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so.
You're like, thank God this is over.
No, I'm glad we got to finally have this conversation about the study. It is a blessing that we did not publish it right away. I have professional reasons why it was better. You have had some insights into the whole site, just I don't want to say dichotomy, but yes, we probably would have been overly favorable after this was over without any appreciation of the differeces that you're suggesting here.
Mm-hmm. And the nuance, you know, there's just so much there. So I'm happy that we waited. I'm happy we did it. And I hope this opens the door for more research, obviously, in this area. I selfishly still hope that you guys have a PhD program so I can do another study. Oh, no. Campbell's like, oh God, what? No, we're not getting one. We can't do that. But no, let's touch really, really quickly on how the lab has grown. So we talked about, like, literally it was like me, you, Danielle, like we were doing everything. And now, because I have a lot of people who reach out and ask about the USF program and they have questions, and you know, it's turned into this really, really awesome thing, and the research that's coming out of there is very unique. Out of, you know, your lab is all physique based, and I would say that pretty much all of Buckner's is performance based.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, what's one of the best things that happened is we hired Dr. Sam Buckner, who you've had on the podcast, so people should know him, but I kind of handle physique and fat loss stuff. But that's only half of what I love, or half of what most of us in this space love. A lot of us are trying to get jacked and build muscle, and that's what his expertise is. So he focuses on that. So USF is unique, very unique, because they have him on muscle, they have me on fat loss, and together it's really cool.
Jacked and lean.
Yes.
Jacked and tan. Well, don't ask us about that.
We have another faculty member who actually, he doesn't necessarily, he's not into the physique or body composition space, but Dr. Marcus Kilpatrick does exercise psychology. So when you put that into the mix, we've really got everything covered with just 3 of us. And I have students that have worked in my lab and Dr. Buckner's lab, or my lab and Dr. Kilpatrick's lab. And I would just add, now my lab we have a waiting list for people who want to be on my research team. We have too many people. It literally got to the point where I didn't know the names of my team because I had like 34. So my current research coordinator, Kara Phillips, and Jacob Brokel, I have co-leaders now. I said, hey, let's cap it at 20 because I'm not liking my mentorship capacity with this large number. So we have our smallest team in the last few years of only 20 research assistants, but I know everybody by name. I actually know what I get to know them better. So that's one of the biggest changes, just the sheer numbers. And we've attracted international students. I've got 2 people from Europe in my lab this year.
Yeah, even when I was there, we had international. We had a few. It always seems to be like a handful.
Yep, no, but I'm saying that are coming because of my research,
Nice.
like not just the program.
Not just
So
program,
that's, what else?
Yeah, so basically if you're interested in anything related to physique enhancement or muscle building, USF really is the place to be. And like Campbell said, there is the opportunity to be in different labs. So if you're not like, hey, I don't want to take on the responsibility of running the entire project, because there are people within the lab who have higher priorities than others, right? Like you're like lab coordinator or you're running most of the stuff. You can still be a part of the research if you just want to like learn and be a part of that and contribute. So everybody has a place and everybody has a position. It's just a different position based on how much you want to give to it. So it's really unique now, and I just love to see that it's running, like I said in the beginning, I don't want to say self-sufficiently because it's not, but it's its own momentum, and that's really, really cool. So anybody who is interested, I would highly suggest it. USF is very affordable compared to a lot of other schools. You're going to get some really great research, and you're also going to get some great classes as well. And it is about 18 months. I mean, you can do it in 2 years as well, but the master's is certainly shorter than some other programs, which is good. So where can people find more about the program if they are interested in reaching out? Is there like just USF?
I would say go to my Instagram. That's easier.
Okay.
It's at Bill Campbell PhD, and I get
so facey. I love it.
What does facey mean?
Like I don't know what it means. Like you're so popular. Like you're, like I don't know. Like just so much. How do I define facey? But it's just kind of a silly word. But before you would have been like, go to the USF website.
Yeah, that's too
go to
many.
my Instagram. I'll answer your message.
Yes,
I have a pretty good following now.
I get more students through that than anything else.
People. That's how the young people communicate. And Dr. Campbell does have a great Instagram. So if you want to just learn information from him and anything else that he's going to be doing and things he's going to be putting out soon, we will not share those yet, but soon I will definitely share when those are available. You can find out through his Instagram. But as always, if you guys found value in the show, please share and subscribe to our YouTube channel and the podcast. It really helps us grow the show and continue our mission to educate more people in the industry. This is obviously something that we're really passionate about as a team, so we appreciate it. And also be sure to check out our website, teamlocafit.com, for any other questions, free resources we have on there, or if you want to apply for coaching. So thank you guys so much, and we'll talk to you next week.